I love stats and I love looking at graphs. I don't know why. Hi, hello, how are you? I'm Alex. If you're new here, it's lovely to meet you. And if you're coming back, we're best friends now. You already know how this goes. Thank you so much for being here, all of you. I really appreciate everyone that comments on these videos and that messages me about different books that I've recommended that they've read or that they've decided to pick up and add to their list. It really makes me excited that you guys trust my recommendations enough to actually read and or purchase these books. So thank you for sharing that with me. I love stats and I love looking at graphs. I don't know why. It's just fun to look at numbers, you know? If you don't understand, that's so fine. Totally get that. I'm just a huge, massive nerd. So I decided I'm going to share some of my stats from my story graph about my year of reading, and then I'm going to share the best books that I've read in 2022. And then I'm just going to talk about some plans that I have for 2023 and what I hope for the year in terms of reading. These stats are honestly so arbitrary and so meaningless, but I thought I would just share them for fun. I read a lot this year, so you shouldn't compare yourself to me or to anyone else, especially in the book community, because honestly, I've read an excess amount of books. So this year I read 95 books, and that totals to 27,000 something pages. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, but Storygraph gives you the option to convert audiobooks into page numbers, so I did that just for the sake of it. My reading goal originally was 100 books, and I have half of December left to read those other 5, but I don't feel pressured to read through those. I'm not making myself read more books just for the sake of reaching this goal. I don't know why I made it 100 books. It was just a random number. I think originally it was lower, and then a bunch of people were like, oh, I expected you to challenge yourself to read more, because I read 85 last year. But I didn't like that. I didn't enjoy having that challenge, and it didn't feel like it was for myself. It didn't feel authentic. Yeah, I'm proud of myself for reading so many books, but it almost feels dishonest, if that makes sense. 50% of the books that I read fell under 4 specific moods. So mostly I read reflective books, then it was emotional, dark, and mysterious, which is no surprise to any of us. I swear I tried to read more happy and funny books this year, but I just gravitate towards emotional reading experiences for whatever reason. 75%-ish of the books that I read were fiction, and then the other 25 were nonfiction. I did read a lot of nonfiction this year. I think I read more than usual. I read a lot of interesting graphic novel memoirs, and in this fall period, early winter period, I read a lot of nonfiction books, mostly in audiobook form, which I think is the best way for me to consume nonfiction, personally. My top 5 genres were literary, contemporary, LGBTQIA+, fantasy, and graphic novels. Again, not a surprise, I read a lot of graphic novels this year and I had a really good time. Literary fiction is just generally always at the top for me. It's just what I know I like, so I tend to read a lot of books that are literary fiction or described to be as such because it just works for me. Star ratings are meaningless, and I know a lot of people in the bookish community are kind of throwing star ratings out the window, which I totally get, because I feel like a lot of the time I'll rate a book immediately after having read it, and usually after reading a book, there's the reading hangover. I have a really emotional response to the book, and then after some time passes and I get to sit with it and think with it and reflect a little more, I usually change my perspective of the book. Sometimes I give it a 5-star after the fact, or I lower the rating. So yeah, 5-star ratings mean nothing. I tend to read people's reviews of books more just to see if the reason they didn't like it doesn't necessarily apply to me, or if the reason that they didn't like it will be something that will affect my reading experience. I think that's a better way for me to understand whether or not someone's recommendation would suit me. However, my average rating was 3.75 stars. I gave most books that I read this year a 4-star rating. I think that was like the biggest on the bar graph. Now, for the best books that I read in 2022, I used this like ranking generator thingy, and I put in all the books that I gave 4 stars and higher into it, and then I like had to pick between one book and the other, and it was like 200 different combinations. And then the generator gave me this list starting from the 15th and working my way up to the #1 best book that I read this year. Again, totally arbitrary. These are just books that I really liked this year. If a book is not on this list, it doesn't necessarily mean I didn't like it. It doesn't necessarily mean that book #1 was the best book like ever written and then book number 15 wasn't as good. This has nothing to do with how good of a book it is. It's just the best books for me based on my reading experience. Are we clear? So number 15 on the list is Love, Loss, and What I Wore by Nora and Delia Ephron, which is a play. It's like a series of monologues and dialogues all about like the feminine relationship to clothing and how clothes make us feel and how our outward appearance generally can reflect on our inward feelings. I really love this. I read this as part of a reading vlog that I did where I read Carly from UnCarly's Favorite Books, and that was just a really fun reading experience. I really loved it. It's a hot pink book. I love a good pink book. Number 14 was a new release from this year, and I read it as a buddy read with Ali from Alice in Pages, and I listened to the audiobook, and that was a very interesting reading experience for me. I really liked listening to this as an audiobook, and I'm kind of curious to read it in physical form because it'll probably be a different reading experience. And that was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I don't think this is a surprise to anyone. This book has been very highly praised this year. Everyone that I know that has read it has really enjoyed it for the most part. It's about these two best friends that work together to create video games. And it was a really interesting perspective of platonic love and friendship, and it was an interesting dissection of relationships. I thought it was a really cool way to tell a story. I thought it was really fun. It made me want to play more video games. Yeah, super unique book. I really, really, really loved it, and I urge you all to read it. It is worth the hype. Number 13 is Bunny by Mona Awad. This was a book that I received for my book subscription. It was right up my alley. First of all, pink book, unhinged woman, speculative fiction, weird, crazy vibes going on. I think it falls underneath the genre of horror, which I've been getting more into this year, and it's very interesting how much horror I've read this year. It's been fun. But this is basically about Sam. She knows these girls called the Bunnies, who she refers to as the Bunnies because they all call each other Bunny, and they are strange. And they invite her to this thing called the Smut Salon, where they share all these like macabre stories that they write with each other. And then stuff goes wrong. It's very good. 12 is Scarborough by Catherine Hernandez. I really, really enjoyed this. This was on the CBC Reads book list for 2022. I recommend this so many times. It's about a bunch of young children living on the east end of Toronto, which is a low-income community. And it just shows all their different perspectives. It's written from a child's perspective, which I think is really interesting. I always think that narration style and that perspective is very unique because it is so different to my own, and it is difficult to write well, in my opinion. Then number 11 is Nightcrawling by Layla Motley. This was longlisted for the Booker Prize in 2022. Layla Motley is only 20 years old, so that just blew my mind. It's an incredibly well-written book, a very interesting story. It's based on reality. It's about this young woman, Kiara, who is taking care of this young boy who's her next door neighbor while also trying to support herself. And she's really having a hard time finding ways to make ends meet. Then she stumbles upon night crawling, and this eventually gets her involved with this secret and super illegal ring of policemen that use girls of the night at parties and for their own personal benefit. Very interesting. Very, very good. Then number 10, we have our first nonfiction, and that was Seven Fallen Feathers by Tanya Talaga. I read this as one of the books for a book club that I was in, and it was very, very interesting. Tanya Talaga is a journalist, and she had a very interesting way of writing, and this is about 7 children that were found dead in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and they're all Indigenous children, and they were kind of found under suspicious circumstances. Most of these kids were either missing for a while prior, or their cases weren't dealt with properly. It's a lot about different police system failures within Canada and how Indigenous peoples were not only treated poorly in a historical sense, but also in a present tense, and how there needs to be a lot of systemic change in order to have a better future. Number 9, another book that I spoke about a lot. I have a whole video dedicated to it. That's Good Girl by Anna Fitzpatrick. It'll be available soon in January in the US. And I'm calling it right now. This is the hot girl book. It's the book for all the hotties. It is required reading. And if you haven't pre-ordered it yet, or if you haven't bought it yet in Canada, then you are missing out, and you should go do that ASAP. Then number 8, we have Tear by Erica McKean. Again, I've spoken about this a lot. I bought this solely because of the cover. I bought it from Little Ghost Books in Toronto, which is a horror bookstore. Fantastic book about female rage and monsters and the fine line between reality and unreality. It's very good. I highly recommend it. 7, Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. It's sapphic high fantasy. I already spoke about this so much, and if you haven't picked it up, I really don't know what you're waiting for at this point. Number 6, Gathering Moss by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She is the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, and this is all about the cultural and natural history of mosses. As a scientist and someone who mainly studies plants, this was a fantastic book, and I think it's a very interesting reflection on a very specific species, and it is quite emotional and beautiful and lyrical. Number 5, we have Fun Home, a family tragicomic by Alison Bechdel. This is a phenomenal graphic novel memoir, and it's all about Alison's relationship with her father. It was a very tumultuous relationship, and his mysterious death. No one that I know that I've recommended this to and then they read it has been disappointed about it yet. So I think that says something. Number 4, In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This was recommended to me over and over again, and I finally read it. Phenomenal memoir writing style. I thought it was beautifully written. Very interesting narration again. A lot of switching between first person and then second person, so it's kind of putting you in the position of Carmen Maria Machado. There was like a choose your own adventure part of this book. Really cool. Highly recommend it. Number 3, Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. I listened to the audiobook of this pretty recently. I thought it was fantastic. It's given me a whole new perspective on feminism and how I self-identify as a feminist. It's really good. It posed a lot of questions, and it's just a lot about this aspect of feminism that is so frequently forgotten about. Number 2 is Hot Milk by Deborah Levy. This was another book that I received for my book subscription, and I've spoken about it a lot. It's in my favorite books video. I loved it. I thought it was phenomenally written. A lot of really interesting themes, a lot of interesting literary devices used. Highly recommend it. I've really fallen in love with Deborah Levy's writing this year, and I can't wait to read more. And then, number 1 on this list, drumroll please, Indigenous Toronto. And this is edited by multiple different individuals who were also authors, but essentially it's a series of essays and musings and excerpts from different Indigenous authors and their experience either growing up or living in Toronto as artists, as individuals, as chefs, as social workers, as healthcare workers. It's excellent. It really blew my mind. I learned so much of the history and geography of Toronto, but also of the cultural background of Toronto, how different Indigenous nations have really influenced and impacted Toronto in so many different ways. So yes, those are my top 15 books of this year. I've read so much this year, it's kind of blowing my mind. For my goals for 2023, I'm not going to be using Goodreads. Sorry to everyone that follows me on Goodreads. I really want my reading experience to be for myself, and I feel like Goodreads has taken that away from me this year, so I'm just trying something new out. I still have Storygraph, but it's private, so no one can follow me, and that's just more for me to personally track what I've been reading and assess my reading taste and such. I also will not be giving myself a crazy reading challenge this year. My goal is to read 24 books, which I think is pretty reasonable. It's 2 books a month. And that's just because I want to slow things down. I want my reading to be more intentional. I want my reading to have more purpose. I don't want to rush through the books that I pick up. I don't want to feel like I have to read certain books to appeal to the general population. My reading experience is for myself. This channel, yes, it's for recommending books to others, but it's also for myself. I don't want to force myself to read books just because they're popular or because I feel left out of the reading experience. I think a lot of reading, it's meant to be taken at your own pace. And like I said, if I'm rushing through books, then it's not an intentional reading experience. There are lots of books that I want to reread. I don't want to feel guilty about not finishing books and kind of leaving them halfway, whether I intend to pick them up again or not. Doesn't matter. If I'm not enjoying something, I don't want to be reading it. And I'm just going to continue to read books based on my mood and see what I'm enjoying. I think I have a better understanding of what I like, and there's a lot more that I want to explore in 2023 reading wise. So hoping for the best. Anyway, that's it, that's all. I hope you all have a lovely end to 2022 and a lovely new year. Like this video if you like this video. Subscribe if you want to see more of my content. I really appreciate all the support you've given me this year, and I look forward to a great 2023 with you all. Until next time, bye-bye.